Welcome to the ninth episode of Space for Faith. I'm your host, Matt, and I'm really excited to introduce our guest for today. And I'm very grateful for his gracious willingness to come on the show. Today, the interview is with Kurt Francom from the Leading Saints podcast and website and organization. We're really grateful for his willingness to meet with us. Unfortunately, though the interview went really well, my voice wasn't recorded. So I'm going to have to go back and edit some explanatory notes and where my voice should be. But gratefully, we were able to get excellent recording of Kurt's voice and his insights, and we look forward to sharing those with you now. We started out by talking about Kurt's podcast, website, and organization, Leading Saints. And I asked him, what is that like on a day-to-day basis? What is the work of his organization doing? And I was interested to hear his reply.
Yeah, what do I do with my time, right? How hard is it to just produce a podcast, right? So to give you some background, so Leading Saints started as just sort of a hobby blog, as I had experienced various church leadership callings where I felt a little bit unprepared, to say the least, and I was just curious what other people were doing, or was there any research out there as far as how to motivate people, or how to how to mentor somebody through a crisis, or what do I do with somebody who comes to me struggling with pornography, right? I don't want to say the wrong things. I hope to say more right things than wrong things, right? And so I just knew that there's this space of, one, there were a lot of leaders who had the same questions and were curious what others were doing. We are all facing very similar problems. So how do we bring those worlds together to say, what are some best practices out there? What have you tried? That's sort of what started as the blog, and then the podcast in 2014, and kind of has grown ever since then. And what was the second part of your question? Oh yeah, the data. So most people right now, if you were to grab a random Latter-day Saint and say, do you know what Leading Saints is? Not everybody knows what Leading Saints is in the church, obviously, but if they do, they'd most likely say, oh, that's a podcast. And when in reality, we're an organization, right? So we're trying to, we're shifting, we continue to do the podcast. So that's kind of just an ancillary way that we create content. But we also want to have a publishing division. That's why we've done I've written books, and we hope to write more books, not just me, but others. But then we have a great online community that's happening. So, which will soon be an app that people can download and have in their phone, where, let's say, brand new Relief Society president suddenly faces questions about welfare, and man, she's just worried that how she's handling this, curious what, she consults a handbook, of course, and those resources the church has, but curious how other people navigate some of these difficult welfare cases. Well, she can go to the Leading Saints community, and with a few strokes of the key, there's even an AI dynamic function in there to ask questions, and she can be pointed to 3 or 4 articles or episodes or clips where I completely figured out, but I feel a little bit more prepared to face some of these daunting tasks of welfare, or insert whatever issue a leader may face. And so we have leaders that go on there and ask questions, get discussions going. We have different live streams, and we bring in therapists, we bring in authors, PhDs, and we just try and stimulate more and more content that we can then catalog for leaders to explore and find the answers that they need right at the moment. So it's quite an undertaking to do all that. I mean, the podcasting is very, I'll batch a lot of episodes. I have a studio that I use in Orem, Utah. And so, I might line up 2 or 3 guests on a week and then go in there and record those in a day. And that'll get me through the next 3 weeks or so. Right. And so I try and get ahead of it. I do a lot of interviewing just remotely, like we're doing. But really it's a lot of that of how can we create more and more resources? Because right now, if you're a newly called Sunday school teacher, a newly called missionary, you can walk into Deseret Book or a church bookstore, and you'll find some resources there. You'll find books or journals or commentaries or whatever it is you need for that calling. But if you're newly called to a bishopric, there's not a lot of resources in there to help you. So we want to kind of be that flag bearer of the leadership content to make sure that people have resources when they're called to church leadership. So that's that maybe gives you an idea of some different things we're focusing on right now.
I asked Kurt to share with us a little bit more about his book.
Yeah, the book is called Is God Disappointed in Me? Removing Shame from a Gospel of Grace. And it was my attempt to explore the doctrine of grace, but I think there is an important antithesis to grace that the adversary uses, which is shame. So it's one thing to understand grace. It's one thing to feel God's love, but it's a whole nother thing to understand the competing power, which is shame, where those moments where we feel less than, or because of what we've done, God's just disappointed in us, right? I truly believe the adversary wants us to know that God loves us, because then he can convince us that God is disappointed in us. And there's something about the power of disappointment, where you'd almost somebody hate you, then be disappointed in you, because the person that disappointed you is someone who does love you, who has high expectations for you. And so it just hurts in a deeper way. So it really is a limiting along with grace. But anyways, that was hopefully what I was trying to accomplish with the book then. And I've heard a lot of great feedback. You can read some of the reviews on Amazon and on Deseret Book of people saying, "Oh, this really gave me a different perspective to consider who God is, my relationship with him, and why he wants me to keep trying and keep repenting and stay engaged in his doctrine."
I asked him for more information about where he got the inspiration for his book and why the topic of shame.
That's a good question. I guess it went to the foundation of just this question of disappointment. I think that it's a universal question that we've all asked, like, is God disappointed in me? Like, I know my parents are disappointed in me from time to time. I know, my loved ones are disappointed in me from time to time. But can God be disappointed in me? And in that feeling, because we have such a strong message of you're a child of God. We have such a strong message of you are loved. But what if we believe that we're loved, but that God's just perpetually disappointed in us? And that is a really interesting space. I feel like the adversary pushes us where he can do a lot of destruction. And so, that's the beginning of starting to believe that maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe there's, I should be rejected, right? And not that they formulate it in those words, but that's sort of subconsciously what's going on. And so, grace is powerful, and we talk a lot about grace, but I just wanted to explore of, like, even those who can articulate grace, who can completely get the idea of grace on paper, but they still have this nagging feeling of, like, but I think God's just disappointed in me. And that's where, like, the intersection of shame, that I think we really need to reconcile before we can fully accept his grace. Because if we accept his grace knowing, like, well, yeah, but almost like the sacrament is, if we if that deacon brought the sacrament over to us, and then but then he rolls his eyes when we have to take the sacrament, like, oh my goodness, like, you were just here 7 days ago and you need to take the sacrament again, right? Like, that's not how the atonement works. That's not how grace works, right? He expects us to take the sacrament. He expects us to need the sacrament, when the premise of needing the sacrament is that we didn't do enough that week, right? And so I would be shocked to think that God, when we reach out to him, when we fall down, when we sin, he rolls his eyes when he has to help us up one more time. Like, when are you going to figure this out, type of thing, right? That's a very mortal frame of mind. And so that's why I think it's really important to understand shame, recognize the dynamics of shame and mortality and how it's coming after us. From the very first story of the Bible, it's a story of shame, right? The adversary saying, look at yourself, go hide. I can't believe you did this. Like, the Father's going to come and realize what you did. Go hide, right? Like that, from the very beginning, the adversary is using shame, and he'll use it in our life as well.
At this point, I thought about shame, and I realized, it does seem as though sometimes we use shame to help influence our brothers and sisters, and our brothers and sisters sometimes use shame to influence us.
Oh, absolutely. Even today, even myself, I still use shame, as a father. And a lot of people will, especially those who grew up in maybe the 70s, 80s, and 90s, it's sort of like, wait a minute, Kurt, like I grew up in a house full of shame, but look at me now, like I'm active, I'm not in jail, I'm a good person, and I always remind them, yes, shame does work, right? And nobody's arguing that shame doesn't work. That is exactly why the adversary uses it so much, is because it's so effective. But just because it's effective doesn't mean we should use it. Murder is effective, embezzlement is effective. Like you can get you to the ends that you want. However, it's very destructive when you use it, right? It will corrode our perceived divine identity to the point that we just think, am I even worthy to be here, or am I even worthy to be part of this plan, right? So it's very subtle, like the adversary is.
At this point, we switched gears and began to talk more about topics that I find interesting, such as the UAP topic and its intersection with faith, and how, as I've learned more about unidentified aerial phenomenon or unidentified anomalous phenomenon, or what people report in terms of contact with non-human intelligences, and how that's sometimes been a challenge for my faith. I asked Kurt if he had any interest in the topic or experiences or anything. This was his reply.
Not outside the movies of Star Wars, I guess. I know it was always sort of a fun, esoteric doctrine to sit with and chat about with friends, or maybe get off topic in high school seminary about, our theology around, extraterrestrial life and what that is. And, having, there's always the, the multiple planets and the ongoing debate of, does every planet have its own savior, or is our savior the savior of all planets, and was our world the most wicked, and that's why he came to our world to be, to die for all mankind everywhere in the universe. And so, and I know there's, I'm sure you spent more time with this than I ever will, but there's various quotes out there from past general authorities, sort of trying to clarify this or bring some context to it, which is fun to sit with. So, but other than that, I've never, from what I understand, at least, I've never been visited, or had an experience with any type of, visitor from another planet. But okay, yeah.
I asked Kurt what his level of knowledge about recent developments in the world of unidentified anomalous phenomenon was, and this was his reply.
Well, I know there's been a variety of congressional hearings, right, about people who have talked to people who have seen the ships or seen the bodies or whatever, right? Yeah.
It was interesting to hear his reply about that, because from what we've discussed, it's not as though he routinely researches this topic. So as a general member of, citizen in the United States who's not looking for this information, it was interesting and kind of gratifying to know that, these News Nation reports and so forth are getting that information across, that there have been congressional hearings and that whistleblowers are coming forward and talking about this topic, claiming to have seen craft and biologics, or that biologics have come with the craft at least. So that was an interesting bit of information to gather from him.
Well, and it's interesting. I think the closest we've gotten to this type of process is with the acceleration of artificial intelligence, right? Where this is a monumental technology, right? That's and depending on who you listen to, one, it's going to transform the entire world, where everybody's going to lose their job, and we'll just depend on this AI in various forms to make the world go round. And then others were like, it won't pan out to anything too disruptive. But to the point where the church came out with a guide for AI, and making an official statement about it, and how talking about how they're going to use it, and so forth. And so I would imagine, if there's sort of that undeniable discovery or an encounter, or the official governments begin to make statements that are definitive about these things and show evidence, and it's sort of like the church has to reconcile that, right? And now, if it is little green men with big eyes, and that's maybe more complicated where I think generally speaking, I think a lot of members of the church, our theology is very unique this way that I would guess the average, Protestant Christian wouldn't really know how to reconcile that in their faith. And then there'd be that monumental general conference talk, about about extraterrestrial life or and how that fits in. And so it'd be fun to monitor. As far as like faith, I mean, I guess that's where it always comes back to, because there have been sort of these esoteric doctrines that have caused doubt, or even with the advancement of science, and where some things that maybe older prophets said without saying it from the perspective of a person in the 1800s, as opposed to today. It's sort of like, well, maybe he would rethink that with this information, right? And so that kind of gets dismissed, and that's why I think there's more and more of this Christ-centered focus, right? That regardless of what spaceships are coming to our world, and let's see what we can learn, and but at the end of the day, like, Christ is our savior type of thing. So, but I mean, taking it to, as you mentioned, like, what if you're that bishop, that says, no, I was abducted by aliens. Now, right now, you'd sort of be like, oh, well, can we get you a good therapist? Like, what medications you on? Or, where maybe if there was more proof, it'd be like, okay, well, I mean, tell me more about that. Are you hurt? Are you, were you abused or what? I mean, what's going on? Let's make sure you're safe there. But yeah, very fascinating to consider for sure.
At this point, I shared with Kurt my thoughts about the UAP phenomenon and my concern that it could be challenging for people's faith. And we started a discussion about some of the modern technological changes and discoveries that mankind is making that could be challenging for people and challenging to implement into our day-to-day lives. And the question would be, how would that affect our faith and affect our beliefs?
I mean, other than just the interesting, the unsolved mysteries types of content you see on TV, where, they put the whole case together and you're like, whoa, like, I'm pretty convinced something else is going on there. It's now I think unsolved mysteries worked better in the 80s and 90s when, Google wasn't around and people couldn't. Now you can find like forums where, oh, this is easy. Here's the 10-step debunking of that thing or the other. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely, when you think of the cosmos and just the mechanics of mortality, right? Like, we have so much to learn in the eternities that, man, I mean, there's things in this world that I think definitely lean to the understanding that God has a sense of humor, that he, he's not just this solemn, eternal being that shows little emotion. And I mean, if he created me, and I'm thinking, if he's anything like me and I'm anything like him, like, I'd be creating, other planets and aliens and things like that. And I don't know if there's some type of disruption that would happen by mixing these different worlds, but man, I would be shocked if I got to the next life and he's like, nope, it was just Earth. That was it. So, but yeah, other than that, I'd have never, other than just staring up into the cosmos and considering the grandeur of God, but that's about it.
Kurt and I had some discussion about Skinwalker Ranch, which is located in Utah, and I shared with him some of the bizarre happenings that occur at the ranch. Aside from just unidentified aerial phenomenon, there's a variety of unidentified anomalous phenomenon, cryptids, other, electrical interference, and different types of things that have occurred on the ranch that have been documented in the series, The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, which I really encourage the listener to watch. But these were Kurt's comments about that.
Well, I think there's an overlap here, and I don't know if this is too far off the mark as far as the focus of the podcast, but it definitely relates to leadership as well, or just our experience of, because you could say that we all claim in our LDS theology to have an experience with another world, right? Essentially the spirit world, right? And how we feel the spirit, how we engage with that world. I've had experiences for sure of being at sacred sites or being in a really important moment and feeling like, oh my goodness, like I feel my grandfather, like I feel like he's here with me type of thing. So that's interesting. And a concept that really maybe worth exploring, but this concept of cognitive bias or cognitive, what's the other one? Or confirmation bias is where so like you go down to this ranch and it's sort of like, okay, I've seen this TV series about these different anomalies happening here, and so your brain almost goes to this place of like, I might expect it, and therefore your brain starts to like create things that maybe you're like, where if you were just in New Jersey, eating a sandwich, visiting there, something would happen, you just maybe dismiss it to something else, right? Where and I think where this is really interesting, where I want to explore more, just in some work we do with leading saints, as far as like our interaction with the Spirit, right? Where we may be in a ward council meeting, and it's sort of like, somebody brings up one idea, but the bishop brings up a different idea, but the idea the bishop brings up feels more safe. Like there's not a lot of risk.
There was a portion of audio here that was clipped out as it had become garbled due to the internet connection. My apologies to Brother Francom.
And our brain wants to see the idea, and then we connect it. Our cognitive, bias connects it to, oh, that must be the Spirit confirming to me that idea is real, right? So, anyways, I'm not looking to like dismiss any of these anomalies that people have experienced, but it is an interesting thing to think about, because we do claim to interact with a different world, even though it's maybe not, in this sense of extraterrestrial beings, but at the same time, it kind of is. We believe in a prophet who had extraterrestrial beings come and visit. And I would love. I mean, I really hope, when we learn about all this stuff in the eternities, that all this is connected in that way of being like, well, of course there were aliens, and of course they visited you, because what else are they going to do as exalted beings, or that's my brother's planet, or I don't know. Anyway.
At this point, I took a detour from our conversation about anomalous things, and we went down a tangent talking about leadership in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I expressed my sincere appreciation for Elder M. Russell Ballard's book, Counseling with Our Councils, and I feel like it's such an important book for members to read and understand. And I wish that we would implement the principles taught in the book more effectively in our councils. And this was Kurt's reply.
Yeah. There's a lot to consider there with how meetings are run, even, and there's various strategies that are out there, as far as like making sure that the leader is only asking questions so that they don't, reveal their bias, or, because everybody will naturally go towards, well, this is what the bishop wants, I guess that's what we should do. Or, just our human nature is to appease the figure of authority in the room, because that, our biology tells us we'll most likely survive in our tribe if the leader likes us, right? And then just that's interesting. A lot of these things we do kind of cut both ways, where yes, councils are beautiful revelatory mechanisms, but also councils can discourage a lot of revelation at the same time by even just the way that it's done, right? The example you give, or avoiding debate, like the minute some level of conflict comes up, we're sort of like, oh, I don't know how to navigate this, when in reality it's in that conflict where some of the deepest revelation can come out of, right? And to me, and going back to the theme of this podcast, that as you talk about, if these things came up, it would create a sense of conflict, something that people now have to go reconcile and seek out and pray about and explore. And so that could be really good in our in just how our human race progresses, type of thing. So councils are, we have a deep tradition of councils, I would say more so than most. We see them as like a revelatory body, where maybe other churches see them as, we're just meeting to get things done and make sure that someone's bringing brownies to the barbecue, and that we're good to go, type of thing. Even our general church is run on councils, which is really fascinating. I think gives a lot of people an opportunity to be at the table, but it also I know those people who are in a ward who've never been on the ward council and feel like their voice isn't heard. And, that I think leaders really have to be proactive in making sure that all opinions and perspectives are at least considered and brought into the room for some of those council meetings. But anyways, that's what comes to mind.
At this point, we discussed concerns about the topics we've conversed about and how they might affect people's faith. And I asked Kurt if he really felt like, some of these modern technological advancements or discoveries will challenge the faith of the saints.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think people are just, people are just built differently. Like for me, I can find something out about church history, whether it's related to polygamy or, the Kirtland Banking Society or whatever it was, where I'm sort of like point of data, that's interesting, where to the person next to me, it sort of rattles their testimony and they're sort of sent in the spiral of crisis of faith. And naturally that my cognitive bias wants to tell me, oh, Kurt, that's because you did it right. You know how to, process information and do so in a faithful way. When in reality, there's so many dynamics of our DNA, the way we were raised, what country we were born in, how much schooling we have. Like, I think there's so much more to that it helps me become more empathetic to those who maybe struggle with some of those points of history or doctrine that kind of rattle the cage a little bit. But yeah, as far as going back to your questions, like reading, to me, I just don't think, every piece of information has a bias to it. And I think we have to recognize that before we consider, what we're reading. And even those being even more skeptical of maybe the authors or journalists who claim, oh no, I'm just being unbiased. Like, wait a minute, like I'm biased by your unbiased, it makes me skeptical. Right. So, but to me, I'm more, I find myself, this is funny. You'd be shocked if you looked at my history on YouTube, where I would say half of what I listen to or the podcasts I consume are from people I just disagree with. Right. And to me, they're rarely persuasive to change into my thinking. However, I find it really helpful just understanding how the other person is thinking and processing the world. And so I don't know. And sometimes as I listen to them, I feel like, I wish you would really take the time to understand my world, because the way you're framing my point of view is so, it's such a straw man, or, so superficial that I feel it's almost insulting that you think, and that's what it's so easy to do to characterize those who disagree with you. But, so to me, generally speaking, I think people should consider, all sorts of content. And there are those that are just, you can just dismiss them on the surface just because it's, every time you've engaged there, I don't know, there are those opinions. But yeah, I think there's such good research out there, in the leadership space with, think of all the books Stephen Covey wrote, and now there's Liz Wiseman and Greg McKeown, and then even people like Daniel Pink, who aren't aren't members of the church. So many other people who have done remarkable research that have helped me think, now I have a better way of consuming the world, approaching the world, and understanding other people. So
I asked Kurt if he felt that there were any American cultural influences that may be inhibiting the growth and development of the church.
Yeah, for sure. There's been critics of the church who, they see the growth in Africa and some of the cultural norms of the white shirt and tie and those things that have sort of inserted themselves in that culture. Now, I know that as I've spoken with various people in other cultures, there is sort of this feeling of, other churches maybe get to manifest their local culture more authentically than we do, right? And because there's sometimes just such a rigidity to our faith tradition and the way things are done, the way meetings start and when they're held, and the handbooks and all those things. So yeah, to answer your question directly there, culture is another thing that cuts both ways, right? That there's such beauty and unity in a culture that can stimulate so much. but also negative church culture can be so destructive, right? That it can keep people from the pure doctrines of the church. It's that powerful, right?
I asked Kurt for any final thoughts, and this is what he shared.
Man, well, if a spaceship lands, I hope we're both on it. And I think this is what a great niche. Just as I thought every niche in the gospel has had 10 podcasts fill that niche, you found one that I think deserves some attention. And so I hope you, I plan to listen and keep tabs on, what we can learn and understand and what we're discovering about the cosmos or space or extraterrestrial life or whatever it is. So keep it going. This is a great idea.
Thank you for listening. Editing was performed by your host, Matt. Web hosting is by Spotify for podcasters. The intro music was Here For You by artist Ketsa, and the outro music was Quiet Outro by Rozakal. Both are licensed free to use with attribution and were found on Free Music Archive.